text messages today that you'll have so much fun.
Good evening, everyone. My name is John Hockenberry. I work for WNYC, and I'm the head of the program, the host of a program called The Takeaway, which you hear here on WNYC, or as we like to call it, Column Tunnel Public Radio, serving Brooklyn and New York equally. It's great to have you here tonight. The Green Space is a fantastic place for the exploration of all kinds of issues, and this evening we'll be really thinking about the unity of our sense of the law and rule of law, and the extent to which we ignore the rules of law regarding nature at our peril, and that we need our legal institutions and our cultural institutions to remind us that the planet is a fragile one, and that the inputs that we call food that are so joyful for us also contain issues of sustainability that we are only now really dealing with in a serious way. And the strategies for figuring out how to reverse some of our excesses in the industrialized world are going to be a challenge for us all this century. And despite the New York primary and the election, which I think for many, how many of you have made your post-election plans, by the way? I see you all have. Very good. It's funny, the New York primary has ruined the political fortunes and expectations of many an insurgent candidate. In 1976, it was Scoop Jackson who imagined that he would be president and won the New York primary, but very quickly it was Jimmy Carter who was the one who had the nomination out of the blue. In 1988, it was in 1988 it was I can't remember now, but in 1992 it was Jerry Brown whose candidacy ended with the New York primary, and it's conceivable that we will look back on this and see that Bernie Sanders' chances as a national candidate may have ended with the New York primary. I think it's funny to look at the GOP side of the equation and to see how Donald Trump won everywhere except the congressional district where his name is plastered all over in virtually every block and neighborhood. Don't you love the Manhattan Republicans who just didn't want to go on jail voting for Donald Trump? They've all taken money from him, of course, right? It's just he's the guy we can't invite to the country club, but so they vote for Kasich. I mean, can you imagine people like Michael Bloomberg couldn't pick John Kasich out of a police lineup this week, right? And so they vote for him in Manhattan. So it's just an indication of the wild and crazy comedy that is this fabulous election. But it reminds us that our democratic institutions are so precious, and our civic engagement is so crucial to all of our fates on this planet. So let's get started with this terrific program and this fabulous panel that we have here. I'm going to introduce everybody. You probably know at least one of the members of our panel. The food legend Mark Bittman is a household name for many of us, especially in New York, longtime columnist for the New York Times. He changed the way Americans make and consume food with many of his writings and writings in the Times and his cookbooks. But he's recently been an advocate for food and sustainability. And are you a vegan yet?
I don't know what the yet part means.
Close. Yeah, no. yeah. All right. But he's getting there. We'll talk about his journey and his trajectory. Please welcome Mark Bittman.
Can I just say something?
Yeah, sure.
In way of greeting, as goes Manhattan, so goes the country. Not true, but it's nice.
Yeah. Yes, boy. Well, more to say about all of that. By the way, you're encouraged to be a part of this conversation. We have cards that are on your chair, and if you have legible handwriting and can write a coherent question and pass them to the ends of the aisles, there are people collecting them, and I'll be getting those questions all during the conversation here, and I will pop them in as quickly as you get them up here on stage. Next, we have Peter Lehner, who's a senior staff attorney with Earthjustice, which is our event sponsor tonight, heading up the organization's Sustainable Food and Agriculture program. Earthjustice, of course, has done all kinds of wonderful things and has really reminded us of how much the planet does need an advocate. Earthjustice has stopped environmental and health harms caused by pesticides and pollution. Peter will talk about the legal and political levers that we have to use and we can't let go of to get to healthier ways of producing food. Peter, welcome. And let's welcome Peter. Back in the 80s, the Union of Concerned Scientists was most concerned about the nuclear winter and the possibility that the Cold War was going to end badly. It ended, but that didn't mean we didn't have issues with nuclear proliferation, and we still do, and the Union of Concerned Scientists is about all of that. But the Union of Concerned Scientists is literally that, all kinds of scientists involved with all sorts of issues that involve the human footprint on the planet. Marcia is an agroecologist based here in New York. Marcia DeLonge originally hails from Wisconsin. All right.
That's right.
Go Wisconsin. And Marcia has studied how to build better farming practices. Did you grow up on a farm?
I did not, but my grandmother did.
All right,
So
of
it's in the
course.
family
Everyone's
genes.
grandmother in Wisconsin grew up on a farm, that's for sure. That is right, that's right. Please welcome Marcia DeLonge. If you want to submit questions via Twitter, you can use the hashtag #LoveGoodFood, and that's for those of you who are online. So, or those of you who are here in the room who can also tweet us. We are monitoring that Twitter feed. So, Mark, what is your, I sort of alluded to your trajectory of thinking about food the way all things are thought about here in New York as a kind of fashion fad, sort of what's the next big hot thing, to something much deeper and much more involved with all of the politics that I discuss every day on the show. Food is so important to everything that we think about here on the planet. How has your life changed as you've thought more and more deeply about food and how we get it?
Well, it's kind of funny that food is trendy, because if there's one thing that's not trendy or shouldn't be, it's food. And I think it's great to enjoy it, obviously, but it needs to be taken seriously. And I think to our credit, or to the credit of increasing numbers of people in this country, we're doing just that. So that's a reason for hope. There are many reasons for despair, and I think they're well publicized enough to not go into them here. I think there are 3 or 4 major issues around food, that some of which are low-hanging fruit and should be addressed, could be addressed easily, and some of which are longer term. But I think the 3 or 4 current most tragic, the things that keep me awake at night at least, are the marketing of junk food to children, which as long as we let this go on, we're dooming another generation to developing habits of eating that will kill them prematurely, will shorten our lifespans, will increase our hospital bills, and so on and so forth. That's number one. Number 2 is the industrial production of animals, for a variety of reasons. Animal cruelty, the kind of agriculture needed to support that, the fact that livestock production in factories is a big contributor to climate change. Some say the biggest contributor to greenhouse gas production. Am I forgetting anything? The fact that we're missing out on well-raised animals, which are better all around. And I guess I'd say the presence of routine use of antibiotics in the food supply, which is connected to the way we produce meat, but has a whole other host of problems, including the rise of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, which kills increasing numbers of people every year, and some say is going to kill hundreds of millions of people by the middle of the century. That is to say, we will get infections that antibiotics can't heal, and die as a result. So those are the not fun parts of eating, right?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. That's great. This is.
I mean,
Wow.
you want to talk about cooking?
If
we
you're
can
going to
talk
bum
about
us out,
cooking.
how would that have felt? Yeah.
You want to keep it light?
Yeah,
we can keep
yeah.
it light. But you know, those are the things that I thought about a lot and wrote about a lot when I was doing the opinion column. They're things that could actually be fixed. So I harp on them most because they're not, addressing them is not pie in the sky. It's not revolutionary. It's practical. Mm-hmm. Both of these folks are working on similar issues and know about this stuff. But and it's nothing new. You know, you can talk about something. It doesn't mean you need to go on to talk about something else. The problem still exists. So these are problems that have been around for a while, and the more people talk about them, the more people worry about them, the better off we'll be, I think, or the sooner we'll see action.
How many of you saw the movie, since we want to get a scientist involved here, and we have one on stage, how many of you saw the movie Interstellar, which is about physics, but the condition of the planet that was depicted in Interstellar, basically agriculture that was all corn. The planet basically could only produce corn. I don't know if you saw the movie or not, but if you didn't, that's fine. No scientists probably wanted to see that movie because there was incorrect physics in it. But do you think we are on a pathway of where agriculture will only be devoted to the production of things like corn, where we will lose the nuance of ingredients because we will sort of overcommit to crops like corn, which can be used for processing food and which will be the last to go when the environment makes agriculture much more difficult than it is today?
Well, so I didn't see Interstellar, but I did see The Martian. And I did have scientist friends who saw both and thought that there were a lot of good science things in there. So just for those of you out there who are wondering what the scientists thought of those movies, pretty good, pretty positive reviews. And in The Martian, of course, we saw compost coming to life as an important piece of the question. So back to your question.
Can you actually eat potatoes that are raised that way?
Well, I've never tried to raise potatoes that way, but when I was watching the movie, it just by chance so happened that I was making potatoes in my own oven. So when that scene came up, I was pretty pleased. Now, they weren't raised in that way. They were raised in my from my CSA farmer in the D.C. broader area. But I hope I don't have to have potatoes raised that way. The agronomy of it all, so agricultural science term, looks pretty good if you have to speculate. But
no, and who knew that Hollywood was going to make a botanist a hero, right?
Right. Well, they called him a botanist. That upset some of the more agronomy or plant science people who felt that there might have been different terms that would have been more appropriate than botanist. But of course, the general public understands
those
a little bit better.
agronomists, you know, you can never please them ever.
But back to your original question, you know, you look on the landscapes outside. Just this summer, I took a road trip across the United States, and you know, you look at the landscape and you think that it might be coming to that you know, you just go mile and mile and mile and mile and you see the same thing. You know, I thought it'd be a fun guessing game. Oh, look out the window and see what kinds of crops we can see, or see what kinds of farmers are out there. And I used to go like a whole state without seeing a farmer, and oftentimes just the same crop time after time again. But you know, we like other kinds of foods, and we're seeing a shift in our culture where people are appreciating different kinds of produce and vegetables, and you know, hopefully we won't get to the point where all we're growing is corn. I think, you know, as an agroecologist, I try to be looking at the solution space and the silver linings of the picture, and I think there's a lot to look forward to. I think we'll be catching the drift of the direction that we're going and making some changes before it comes to that.
Is soil preservation an important component to maintaining diversity of species in agriculture so that we
aren't sort of left with a soil base that will only produce the kinds of things that we've been doing in the industrial agriculture space?
Well, soil fertility, having healthy soils is important for so many reasons. It stashes so much carbon. So when you hear about soil carbon sequestration, that's what we're really talking about, is all of this wonderful rich carbon that can be stored in the landscapes where we aren't usually paying attention to it. But this is a really important reason why we need to be thinking about healthy soils. Healthy soils are starting to be known more and more to have more of those nutrients to create healthier foods. Healthier soils help prevent erosion. They help us with so many things. So yeah, we need to be thinking about how to keep our soils healthy, to keep ourselves healthy.
Peter, I know you're not an anthropologist, but as a lawyer, you're close, I suppose. You observe human behavior and draw conclusions about the large groups of people. Since the ways in which we prepare food, cuisines, come from all kinds of cultures and places all over the world, and it can be said that cuisines were developed largely as an answer to the question of how are we going to live with the materials that we have at hand in the places where we are. That in many ways, some of those cuisines were really all about maintaining a sustainable relationship with the earth in the place where we lived. How does attempting to have all the cuisines available on Amazon at once delivered to your door impede precisely that sustainability question by erasing seasons and erasing geography and giving people the illusion that we can live anywhere at any time?
Well, it's partly the cultural disconnect with the soils, but it's also the flip of that is how did we get to the place where there's really food with no culture? Because much of 75% of what we eat is either processed or ultra processed, and that's sort of cultureless, soulless food. And I was talking with Mark earlier, and as he said, part of the reason we're here actually is not culture, but we've got a lot of laws that create a system that is this messed up food system. It's not because that's what is most naturally effective, but we have a system where the vast majority of our subsidies go to corn, go to soy, which then gets put into meat and soda or biofuels. So the foods that aren't very healthy are the cheap ones. We have a system where the workers throughout the system are about the worst treated, worst paid in the entire American economy. And that's all a result of the laws. It's not a result of the culture. The farm industry...
But it has an impact on the culture.
It has an impact on the culture. The culture largely right now is skyrocketing rates of disease. What we eat right now is the largest contributor to our poor health in this country. Even more, it just recently overtook smoking. So right now, a system that should be nourishing us is actually getting us sick.
And should be delivering us cues as to what its relationship is with the earth. That's all erased. So, Mark,
right.
When we eat the products of industrial agriculture without understanding where it comes from and the processes that deliver it to us, and also not missing those processes that delivered fresh food to us when we were more sort of geographically appropriate, all of that is contributing to bad health and a sort of culture of food invisibility. How do we restore that, Mark?
Well, that's the $64,000 question, I guess is what we say. The omnipresence of all ingredients at all times, everywhere. It's not that new, although it's increasing. I mean, we all remember tomatoes in our supermarkets year round, but now it's asparagus anytime you want it, guava anytime you want it, bananas, of course. I think that some kinds of respect for regionality and seasonality would go a long way toward fixing some of this if you're trying to work from the individual out. If we do change the culture, if we do succeed in helping people understand that real food is grown, not within a 50-mile radius or anything like that, but real food is grown in a season, in your region, delivered by truck, in a reasonable amount of time, cooked in your kitchen, and so on. That's what real food is. If we can manage to shift the culture so that people understand that, that would be a sea change. But we need policy changes also. It's not going to happen only because individuals change their minds.
So here's a hard question, and that is if we agree that there's an illusion delivered by the ways in which we get food in America today, and that illusion impairs our ability to get ourselves out of this predicament on some level, because it keeps our ability to advocate for policy and our kind of passions for wanting good food sort of stunted because of lack of information. Is Whole Foods just as bad as, Chef Boyardee, in the sense that Whole Food delivers a certain kind of illusion that all perfect food can exist under one roof, organic food can exist under one roof, and that, canned food gives the illusion that, hey, this is convenience and there's no problem. Are both part of the same illusion, Marcia?
Throw in the hard question at me.
Yeah.
I think we need to start to stop pointing fingers so much as looking for solutions. And one thing that you can give Whole Foods credit for is trying to do a better job of advertising the history of different foods that they have available in their stores. And so at the very least, when you go to a place like Whole Foods, you can look on the shelf and see a variety of different strawberries, for example, and they say where they're from, and they say how they're labeled. They label whether they're organic or not, or whether they're sustainably grown, and at least that provides the information for the consumer to help you break through that illusion as you're shopping. I mean, they at least give you the opportunity to do that, so that when you look at that shelf, you say, oh, these aren't all the same. These strawberries aren't all the same strawberry. There is a different story behind this food. The more that because I agree with you, the more that we as a community can understand the history of our food, that we can pay attention to the way that it's produced, that, Earth Day is coming up, and the more that we can recognize the connection between the foods that we eat and the changes that we see in the world around us, the better off we'll be. And when we go to the grocery store, we have that chance to vote. We have that chance to make that connection with every bite that we take.
Peter, since you know a lot about the legal journey that is required to get any labeling mandatory labeling in anything, would it be better to hear the story of, the story as written, as Marcia has told us, or would it be better to have food graded by the amount of frequent flyer miles on airlines that they would have, in other words, indicating how long it took them to get here and how much of the price of the food is related to, absolutes like fuel consumption, long distance travel, that sort of thing?
Well, before I answer that, I'm going to go back to the illusion question, because it's important to know that much of our whole system is actually based on an illusion. The farm industry would like you to think that farming is still largely small, little, mixed farms, sort of the Jeffersonian democratic model.
And he had slaves, remember?
They don't mention that part, but they want to make you think that that's what farming is, when the reality, of course, is very, very different. Huge monoculture, largely owned by big corporations. A very small fraction of the companies produce 80% of our food. In almost every area, whether it be grains or meat or retail or seeds or pesticides, the top 4 companies own or control the lion's share of the market. So there's this image that is peddled about the food industry, which is vastly different from the reality. And that illusion is a huge, tremendous barrier to change. And as to the specific question, honestly, food miles is not the big issue. People can get excited about local food, I think, for other reasons, because it is getting you back to a connection of food, knowing your farmer perhaps. But if you look at, for example, the greenhouse gas footprint, the extent to which your kiwi or orange juice or anything else is contributing to climate change, in most cases, the transportation's a very small part of that.
So then what would you measure? What would you measure in terms of identifying food production techniques that are particularly harmful? What would you, what kind of sign would you create that tells consumers the production techniques here are having these consequences?
Well, again, there's two issues there. One is production techniques, and the second is the food itself. Because you can actually produce food that is maybe produced wonderfully, but if it's terrible for you, it doesn't really matter how it was produced. And that's why there's a big push right now for added sugars on labels, because so many of our foods do have added sugars, and we have this obesity and diabetes epidemic that is very much linked to all the sugar in all of our foods. So it's both a question of how it's produced and what it is. How it's produced, there's been a couple efforts to try to make it very simple, sort of A, B, C, D. I think whole food has a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in terms of how they're produced. Pretty hard to simplify it down to a simple number, but I think you can move into that direction.
What are the things that you would stop tomorrow, Mark, in terms of if you could wave a magic wand and either affect ingredients that have egregious health consequences or food production techniques that have egregious climatological and environmental consequences?
I can answer that by maybe elaborating on this label question. I talked about 3 things that I thought were egregious before, and I suppose the fourth that I would add would be onerous labor practices, slavery or near slavery or underpayment in the food system, as Peter said or alluded to. 8 of the 10 worst paying jobs in the United States are in the food system. There are 10 million food service workers in the United States, and most of them are paid badly, and so on and so forth. But the labeling thing, we could take production into account. We could take nutrition into account, and we could take greenness, or whatever you call it, into account. And then the fourth thing to take into account would be something that I've never come up with a better word than foodness, which is to say a blueberry is a blueberry. Blueberry jam is sort of like a blueberry, and the stuff that they put in breakfast cereals that pretends to be blueberries, or blueberry chewing gum, has no foodness. And it all sort of boils down to these same issues. Is the food of high quality? Is it actually food? Or the people who prepare it being treated well? And is the land being respected?
But an enormous amount of literary energy goes into the creation of menus that we read at restaurants that tell us about the sun-dried tomato reduction and the various salsify, tartar kinds of configurations that make our very expensive restaurant meal so delightful. Could we use those same literary techniques to describe a narrative about the food that we're eating that would begin something like, we will smother this salad with a dressing that your pancreas will embrace because it's filled with all sorts of sucrose, and the fish that you're getting was slaughtered along with 6 tons of bluefin tuna and dolphin needlessly, and we'll finish off your dinner with a preparation of agricultural commodities that were produced by slave labor in Chile. You could actually make a menu like that at a restaurant in town, right? You should do that column tomorrow immediately. Because you'd be doing it much better than I could.
The real answer to that question is that 400 times as much money is spent marketing bad food as spent selling healthy food, real food. So you could do that, but it wouldn't get the attention that the marketing of bad food gets.
Can I jump
Go,
in?
Marcia.
Yeah. Well, I would just like to propose that there might be a simpler solution out there, and that would just be supporting farmers in producing food that is healthier and is produced in a healthier way. And some of these things, you've just rambled off a long list of complicated things. And, you know, as an agroecologist, I'm out there studying the really nitty-gritty details of the ecology of systems, thinking about nutrient cycling in water and which crops should be planted where. We don't want all those technical details on our food, but we don't want to have to sort through that when we go to the grocery store. We don't need to want to make all those hard decisions with every single detail available. But we want to know that behind the scenes, the farmers that are producing food in the way that is providing us with cleaner water and cleaner air and revitalizing those soils instead of degrading the landscapes and feeding us healthy food, those are the ones that are in a position to have really successful businesses. So on the one hand, you know, as consumers, we have this really powerful opportunity to vote with our fork. We also have an opportunity to vote with our actual votes. You know, this is the election season. We have a campaign at Union of Concerned Scientists as a partnership with Food Policy Action and the Heal Food Alliance, where we're just trying to simply raise these issues to have people in positions of power talking about food, talking about food equity, you know, who's working in the food system, how are they being treated, and what are the outcomes of having a set of policies that don't oftentimes lead to food that you know really is helping us create the sustainable system that we need.
Well, here's a great question. It's from the audience. Margot asks, there is by some accounts a tension in the food movement between opting out, building alternative food systems, and reform, in other words, directly tackling the problems of big food and big agriculture. Do you agree that such a tension exists, and how should advocates think about the relationship between the opt-out movement, the sort of off-the-grid movement, and the reform movement of existing big food institutions? How do you think? And do you even think that tension exists?
Well, I would argue that it really isn't a tension, but it's two sides of the movement. Because, well, first of all, a lot of people don't have the chance to opt out. There may be some that have this wonderful opportunity to get the perfect food, but for a tremendous number of people, it's not what's on the label, but frankly, it's what's cheap, because that's what they can afford. And right now, because all of our subsidies are going basically to subsidize corn and soy, which then gets processed into non-food or things with very little foodness in them, that is what is cheap. And so we have to address that issue as well. But what the opt-out side brings to us, and I wouldn't call it opt-out, is it's showing that an alternative model is possible. Because what the big industry would like to try to say is, this is the only way to feed the world. And that's not true. But as long as people believe that this is the only way to feed the world or to get decent food cheaply enough, then their model is what people are going to stick to. So the other model is important to build it up, the CSAs, the opportunities for local agriculture, for cleaner agriculture, agroecology. All of this shows that an alternative is possible. And as Marcia can talk about more, it can feed the world. And it actually can feed the world with vastly lower costs.
Since you raised the issue of obesity, there's a follow-on to another question that one of you asked out here. And I'll add to it because I think it's a fascinating question. And since we do have a lawyer on stage, and it's often the case that having a lawyer on stage is not what you want to clarify things. But Peter happens to be someone who's helping us here, and we're grateful for that. The soda taxes, the Bloomberg soda taxes and sugar taxes in New York failed because they were configured by the advocates for industry as an impingement on freedom. But the same laws or the same restrictions were put on smoking. And an argument could easily be made that you should be free to smoke. There are issues of, secondhand smoke is a consequence that you're imposing on other people. We ought to be able to regulate that. But there are certainly consequences to obesity which affect everyone's pocketbook. Just go to an emergency room and see people dealing with diabetic compliance. Why is this freedom construct in the way of regulating behavior and giving people informed and better choices about their food?
Well, first, I'd say the good news is Berkeley did manage to pass a soda tax. Mexico passed
Berkeley is
a
not
soda-
America.
No, actually, Berkeley is at the forefront of many major changes in America and has been for a long time. That's a joke that industry would like you to believe. Berkeley is representative in a very peculiar way. It leads the way. California leads the way.
Is Berkeley scalable politically in America, do you
I can
think?
guarantee you that there will be soda taxes in 15 or 20 cities in the next 5 years. There will be probably 5 within the next 2 years, including Philadelphia, which is hardly Berkeley.
So McDonald's advertises this week for a bottomless French fry. McDonald's is having trouble. They advocate for a bottomless French fry option for various McDonald's around the country, and it's something that lasts for a week. Is it infringement on speech for those kinds of offers to be at least presented with a caveat that there are health consequences to making it seem as though that's like a wildly fabulous idea?
Well, first of all,
It is a legal question. I mean,
there
Well, do you
are-
think it should be? Do you think it should? I mean, we'll get to the lawyer because he knows the answer. But do you think that's a problem?
well, of course, it's a problem. There are legal issues that are going to have to be, forgive me, there are legal issues that are going to have to be surmounted for us to get information, important information to people as they're buying food. Whether there's a question about overeating French fries being dangerous or drinking Coca-Cola or other sugary beverages being dangerous, there is no longer a question about those things.
Well,
there are health consequences that, as you say, cost all of us money and longevity and health services and so on.
Well, the elegant concept that money equals speech has distorted and destroyed our political system. Is sugar equals speech going to kill us all, Peter?
Well, yes, is a short answer. But the longer answer, not to get into a long story of constitutional law, but you don't have a right to lie and you don't have a right to deceive your customers. And a lot of what is being peddled right now is in fact misleading customers, and it's demonstrably misleading customers that is leading to all these health impacts. And so whether it's a local government like Berkeley, Mexico imposed a soda tax, and a lot of people are trying to figure out how can we push back against the 400 million, more than that probably, advertising for junk food that is going on out there, and find ways to push back and start telling people a little bit of what's going on.
Marcia, do you advocate the removal of animal protein from the diet of Americans that as a matter of policy?
We don't. So in our program at Union of Concerned Scientists, and UCS as a whole has several different types of scientists working on it. Of course, we have health scientists and also climate scientists, and then agricultural scientists like myself. And what we know is that from a health point of view, if you're eating a lot of meat, you should cut back. And from a climate science point of view, if you're eating meat from the wrong places or from the wrong systems, and if you're just buying a random burger, that's probably coming from one of those kinds of systems where the meat that you're eating is related to tropical deforestation or is being fed purely by corn or soy that's produced in some of these systems that we were talking about being a root of a lot of the problems. Yes, then you should probably cut back on that meat. We have lots of grasslands and rangelands throughout our country that are very healthy ecosystems that store a lot of carbon, that have animals that are raised in extremely good conditions, where those same consequences, environmental consequences that come from that meat is different. So, it's probably not realistic to ask the entire world to be vegan. We kind of touched on that earlier in our introductions, and I don't think that that's what we need to do either. But we need to be really conscious about where we are getting some of these protein sources that we eat on a regular basis.
Although in the early 20th century, if we had this stage and had microphones, for that matter, and had asked the question, it's probably not realistic to imagine that someday there will be big box stores that sell every kind of food in every kind of season and every kind of, what's realistic isn't necessarily our guide. A question from the audience is, do food additives and replacements and nutrient replacement strategies offer a solution to getting animal protein out of the diet? Do you think replacement is a good way of changing people's diet? In other words, simulating other kinds of cuisine with agricultural vegetable products is a good strategy? Do you think that works on a big basis or just a small basis?
I'm in favor of eating real food, and I think it's clear that that we are eating too much meat. It's a fact that if the rest of the world ate meat at the rate that the United States and other English-speaking countries of the West ate meat, there wouldn't be enough land to raise all that meat. So it's from one single perspective, it's impossible for everybody to eat as much meat as they want. It's just not possible. So I think the solutions, the ideal diet, the way to do this is not to make fake meat, but to eat less meat and to eat more of other stuff, and that other stuff should be food.
How much of an issue is packaging?
Big issue. I get really two reasons. One is that the packaging itself sometimes leaches chemicals into the food. So you start off with good food, but after you get these chemicals that have leached into it, it's no longer healthy food. We just recently are pushing the FDA to try to take a whole class of chemicals out of food plastics, the chemicals that keep the wrappers nice and supple, to try to take that out.
What are those chemicals?
Phthalates, PHTH. How many words are spelled like that? LATE.
So the word needs a vowel to begin with. What else is it? What else is it doing to me?
And what
else is it doing to me?
It is a carcinogen, and it causes a whole range of other health impacts as it leaches in, particularly, for example, into fatty substances like cheeses and others. So when you get your American cheese. But at least we've got
supple cellophane, I guess.
Yeah, which is important.
And a word that begins PHTH.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of other chemicals that are sometimes used as colorings or flavorings or other preservatives. And there's a whole range of these, actually thousands of them, that are added to food, which might start off as pretty good food, but after it's had all these chemicals added to it, become a lot less safe. And most of those don't have to be disclosed on the label. Many of them are secret to even the government, the Federal Drug Administration that oversees this, the Food and Drug Administration. And industry is obviously trying to keep all of this quite quiet.
Do you know a lot about packaging?
Depends what you mean by
all right,
a lot.
Well, can I ask you just a question? This is just one for me. It's just for me, okay? Sorry. Why do Armenian cucumbers, the big long ones, wear that plastic condom? And none of the other cucumbers wear the same?
That one I can't answer.
Why do those cucumbers come with the plastic? Nobody knows.
Protection.
Safer that way, maybe.
Protection.
Yeah.
So in other words, it keeps them. Yeah. Thank you, Mark. That's right. We are boys. Yes, indeed. I should have known the answer to that. Is the price of food realistic in terms of the consequences that we're going to have to pay for anyway, Marcia?
Well, a lot of the cheapest foods that we have are the foods that are being produced and destroying the quality of our water, taking away from the availability of our freshwater resources. I think for most of these foods that we're getting really cheaply at the cost of the environment, water, air, climate,
labor.
Our own health, labor, for sure. We probably should be paying a little bit more. But we also should be paying the people who work in our food system more And one of the things that you always hear is, well, can we afford to have higher prices of food? Because how are people going to afford it? Well, we need to make sure that people can afford healthy food that they're producing.
I just want to just jump here. We were at a conference last weekend to try to look at this question, the true cost of food. And if you take the value of the whole food industry and then you add the value of the health-related costs that are clearly attributed to the food industry, the costs of what it would take to pay the food industry workers, the 22 million people that produce and serve and deliver our food, even close to a living wage, you are actually looking at probably 2 or 3 or 4 times the apparent cost of food.
400% inflation.
Yeah, because the
level
healthcare
of
costs, the
delusion that we're
labor,
living
and
in.
the pollution costs.
Wow. Mark, given that we are committed in this industrialized society to allocating only so much time to the production of food to raise a family, and it may or may not be realistic for our families to increase the amount of time that we have to either acquire food or to prepare food. What limitations are there on how the consumer can actually drive this in terms of making their healthy food choices better? What can the industry do to help the consumer maintain the amount of time that they need to ration to do the other things that their jobs demand? In other words, how much of a tension is there between the way we schedule our lives in the jobs that we have and the time that's going to be necessary for us to do the appropriate things to make our diets healthier?
I mean, there's so many answers to that question because it goes back in a way to alternative systems versus reforming big ag, both of which are important. It goes, we can talk about ways to make food more convenient, but the reality is that to produce and prepare real food does take some time, and then it gets into a question of what people's priorities are. I've made this joke for 15 years now, but the saddest thing is when people tell you they don't have time to cook and they sit around watching cooking on television. And
that joke still gets a laugh.
Joke still gets
later, man.
And it's
that
still
fresh
true.
joke. Fresh joke. Nice.
Still true.
Oh, it is true. It is true.
But if you're looking at solutions for, if you want to look at solutions for people to be eating real food, they could include communal cafeterias, they could include cooking classes, they could include supplying equipment to people who can't otherwise afford that, they could include subsidizing fruits and vegetables, taxing bad food and incentivizing the consumption of good food. All of these things are possible. It's a question of where our priorities lie. And, as Peter said 2 or 3 times already, the system encourages the production of non-food, the production and consumption of non-food.
When people try to do it differently, and I don't want to single out Whole Foods or Chipotle is what I'm going to talk about now, scientifically speaking, how close to the edge does a Chipotle strategy go to maintain organic quality ingredients scaled at an industrial level to serve at the retail outlets at the proliferate? I mean, there's a Chipotle in almost every 4 blocks here in Manhattan. How close to the edge of bringing pathogens along does a strategy like that have to be? I mean, they got in trouble with the pathogens. I think every retail food establishment has some of the same problems, but someone who tries to do it organically and deliver at the rate that we want, do they have a narrower margin for error?
Well, I mean, any business that's trying to operate in a new space is going to be challenged, and the bigger they are, the easier it is to see when they fail. We're all over them in the media when we see problems in businesses like Chipotle who have an issue arise in food safety. Food safety.
But are they wrong for trying, or do consumers need to be more educated as to how much of a risk it is always going to be?
The the problems at Chipotle are not a result of them sourcing food regionally or a result of them using organic food. They don't use very much organic food. They don't source that much regional food. What they have done is pledged not to use antibiotics in their food, and that's not whatever these problems stem from. It's not from them going too far to the good side. That's a misconception. That is not what happens. I don't think I don't think they know what went wrong. But this is more of a jack-in-the-box situation than it is, this is a problem because they're using organic or regional or food that's grown too well and too close to the soil. That's not what this is about.
How many of you have looked at, I mean, has anybody looked at we've seen this in the textile industry, in the fashion industry, where there has been some success in identifying clothing that is made with labor production techniques that are abusive to human rights. I mean, that are beyond the pale in terms of human rights. Can you do the same with food? Are there ways of offering incentives? Does living wage, fair trade, do those designations work in terms of identifying the food production techniques that abuse labor in places in the world where the production is centered?
Certification schemes like Fair Trade, Rainforest Alliance, and others, those do address labor conditions. But just here at home, a lot of those don't apply. Those are for imported food. And as I said earlier, we've got 22 million people in our food system, and the conditions from the farm worker to the processing plant to the food chain workers are in almost every way the worst sector in the U.S. economy. And that is beginning to change extremely slowly as people begin to start thinking about where's their food coming from, know your farmer, and efforts like that to try to put a human face on the box of strawberries or on your hamburger. But we have to do a lot more of that to make you realize that there is a person behind this. There's often several people. I mean, there was a recent expose of working conditions in poultry processing plants where workers are, working on this many chickens every minute. Every 2 seconds, they're working on another chicken. And those are just inhumane, leaving aside to the animal, they're inhumane to the people working in there. And people have to start realizing that's as a true cost of what they think of as cheap food.
And 5 years ago, people talked about animal welfare and never talked about human welfare and food, and that has changed. That's a good thing. Labor is taken into account now.
But if the worst ingredients end up directed at those sectors of the economy that are below a living wage, that in other words, people in poor areas of the United States are disproportionately consuming bad ingredients. If we have to absorb a 400% inflation to basically give agricultural workers a living wage, or even to get them up to something that's significantly better than they are now, doesn't that have are people going to pay that kind of an inflationary rate for food that's not subsidized? Isn't that going to have just huge impacts on the economy, and particularly on poor people? Again,
it's not a question really of subsidy or not. We are subsidizing all the wrong food right now. And so that is a big driver why people are going to the wrong food. If we took those billions and billions of dollars and used those to subsidize healthy food and produced in a healthier way, with the same amount of money that we're spending, except we would have a healthier food system, except we would be saving hundreds of billions of dollars, perhaps even in the trillions of dollars, in terms of better health care.
So how do you design an advocacy program that would remove, that would present it in a way that if we subtract subsidy X from corn and add benefit Y to this agricultural sector of workers, we would produce this human benefit in our society? How can you advocate for subtracting the subsidy from corn and adding it onto this other place? How do you design that advocacy?
I'd be interested to hear everyone else's thoughts, but it's a lot of steps. Ultimately, there's the Farm Bill, which is the fundamental law that sets our farm and agriculture policy. It's a tough bill politically. There's a lot of power behind it, and it changes very slowly, and over the years has gotten worse and worse.
Well, it's filled with monsters. I mean, there are
Exactly.
ethanol. Monster.
But here's a hopeful element, which is 15 years ago, a lot of us were working to try to change our energy system because we could see that our energy system was leading to climate change and having just catastrophic planetary and human effects. And honestly, we weren't quite sure how we were going to get there, and it seemed pretty hard because the fossil fuel system seemed very entrenched. Right now, we're in a place where we really are moving to a clean energy system. A lot more clean energy is being built. We're using our energy more efficiently. Coal use is going down. And all of that is dealing with electrons, which actually people don't really care about.
Well,
they just want their lights. We're now talking about food, which people care about. So you have the same issue of system change, but about something that people can actually get energized about.
All right, if people are going to swallow the changes that are required to produce some of the benefits that we're talking about here, isn't that the equivalent of getting people in Berkeley to swallow nuclear energy as a way of reducing carbon footprint? In other words, which is a bigger challenge? Will Berkeley accept nukes before food consumers in America accept the kind of price hikes and changes that they're going to have to make to significantly impact their health? Marcia, I'll give you the hard one again.
I love this.
And you live in the closest thing to Berkeley on the East Coast. That's Tacoma Park, Maryland.
Well, and I lived basically in Berkeley before I moved to Tacoma Park, so I feel pretty well equipped to answer this question. You know, I mean, I think the thing that requires reiterating here is that we are paying this price. We're just paying it other places. We're paying it other very painful places. We're paying it in healthcare. We're paying it in our children's health. We're paying it in our favorite lakes and rivers and our summer fishing trips. We're paying it in climate change. We are paying this cost, and we will have to find a way to cover for that. So this is about, looking at the system that we have, finding ways to reorganize the system and learning where those solutions are so that when we're paying for this, we're paying in the logical, preventative place that leads us to a more sustainable, balanced way of doing things. And again, I mentioned this already, but this is what the Plate of the Union campaign is all about. This is about getting people to start thinking about these issues, to start challenging yourselves with what might the solution be, because you're right, we don't have the roadmap forward exactly, but we need all kinds of bright minds who think about all these different kinds of issues that all the kinds of people who are affected by these problems. We need these people starting to craft the solutions for the future.
All right. I have one question from the audience, and thanks so much for the great questions from the audience. And most of the ones that I've used that I haven't even identified as audience questions are from the audience. Can we resolve with you three the question of GMOs quickly? Are GMOs good? Yeah, right. I figured. Yeah,
no, we absolutely can.
Yeah.
Marcia can answer that.
All right. Yeah, right.
No. And I guarantee you that Peter and I will agree. Guaranteed.
Guaranteed?
Guaranteed.
Are GMOs something we should fear or something we should embrace?
Well, I love that you pitched this question first by saying, can we just briefly, quickly get rid of the question of GMOs?
Well, I didn't want the whole night to be about GMOs.
Well, good. That's a good strategy.
I've done radio shows on GMOs, believe me.
Well, so I mean, GMOs, the science, the technology. I mean, we need to be thinking about how we can develop any scientific tools. That's great. The way that GMOs are applied today, the places that you see GMOs, the systems that the current GMOs have been promoting are these very simplified, systems of one crop every year, year after year, same place, that are leading to increased weed problems, increased fertilizer problems, increased soil erosion. That's the problem that we have with the systems that have been supported by today's GMOs. So, it's really about, we really need to be thinking about the systems. We really need to be thinking holistically about the problems that we have. And sometimes, I love that stuff, but that hurts some people's brains, I know. But that's
you have
really...
to change your number if you advocate GMOs. You have to change your address. You have to do the Witness Protection Program. I swear to God.
We need to be thinking about systems, right? We need, as a scientist, you got to support science. On the agricultural landscape that we have today, we have to be really aware of what systems that technology, when applied on our landscape, has been promoting.
And so be much more concerned about the strategy of a Monsanto and get them to change rather than focusing on the science itself. Is that what you're saying? In other words, the application of the science is the problem.
Anyone else hear me say don't focus on the science? Because that would never come
well,
into my
don't focus on the science as being wrong, as being you want to throw out the science. You want to embrace GMO technology.
If we want to understand the attacks that have come from GMOs are primarily attacks on the predominant systems that are out on our landscape, that are dominating, that are these monoculture, so one crop year after year after year, that GMOs have really enabled to be very high yield, that's good, but have created huge problems for us that, we can't just, we know how to fix these problems in different ways. We know that we can build soil health. We know that we can have more complex crop rotations. We know that we can use, organic amendments like compost, manure, instead of all of these chemicals. We know that there are other ways that are better for the earth to tweak these systems. And again, I just want to reiterate this. I mean, we're not necessarily talking about changing the whole agricultural landscape overnight. There are practices, stepping stone kinds of practices about the ecology of the system, and ecology, all of the parts add up to more than the whole. That's why when you start taking things out, these systems start to collapse. We need to just start finding the stepping stones that'll bridge our way to a better way, and that requires, yes, like looking at technologies, yes, but when we point to the symptoms of the problem, we need to be thinking about the system that we're looking at and how the system is creating these problems, rather than looking at one crop or a different crop or a certain technology. We need to be thinking bigger than that.
Are you agreeing?
I mean, in summary, I think Marcia would agree. There's nothing wrong with the technology itself. It's its current application.
Peter?
It is called the herbicide-resistant GM crops, which is what GM has been used, has led to this skyrocketing increase of these herbicides, which are leading to, among other things, the health impacts on humans, the wiping out. You've probably read about the monarch butterflies, which need the milkweed, and all these other impacts. Again, all going back to what I said earlier, instead of the model of farming that they would like you to think, we have these vast monocultures, which are enabled by GMs. And that's why I think Marcia's dead right. We have to be thinking about using natural systems to create a farming system where the true costs of pollution, of healthcare, of climate change are avoided, and then the food costs can more than offset those.
All right, I'm going to end on this question. I'm going to just sort of indulge. We're going a little bit over time, but being between you and the cocktail reception is a position that I'm comfortable with, and I think I'll get out of here alive. Because I think that we want to leave people with the sense that consumers can drive this. That yes, there are huge, big players that we might not get a chance to either demonstrate in front of or confront in the way that we might want to, or that we may not live to see the political advocacy reach the goals that we would love to reach in our lifetimes. But we want things that we can do today. There are two models. One is the parent who is very, very concerned but absolutely committed to the quality of life of their kids. They cannot break away from that. They absolutely will do anything they possibly can to ensure the best quality for their child. And let's just assume for a moment that parents in this case are not like Manhattan parents who want all other parents to suffer so that their children get the best. That there is an egalitarian impulse in these parents that I'm imagining, all right? Are consumers able to affect change with this sort of parental impulse, or are consumers more like junkies in that they're addicted and that their need for food will drag them into the pit of industrial agriculture because they can't resist what's being offered to them? Are consumers' joy in food, like parents, going to change this system and make it more ecologically responsible? Or is our need for food make us more like junkies in that we can't resist what's going to be offered to us? What do you think? Are consumers more like parents or junkies?
Oh, I think consumers are more like parents. I think that, and part of this is we can see it from events like this happening tonight, right? We see a greater culture shift towards these things as people have learned more and more about the damaging consequences that can come from eating poorly, and people are afraid. They don't want to see their kids having a shorter lifespan or contracting one of these dietary diseases, and that's what we see from our work, and that's what I see from my perspective on the world too.
Peter?
I'm going parents.
Peter?
I don't think it's an
Parent
either
or junkie?
I don't think it's either or. There's some of both. And again, part of the reason you may want to do all this wonderful stuff, but if you can't afford it, you're stuck with what the system is providing. So that's why we have to both act as a consumer and act as a citizen, making our voice heard. That's what we do, and that's what everybody here does. Mark was one of the best of that, making that voice heard, telling people not just take what's on the shelves, but go out there and start trying to change what's on the shelves.
Mark Bittman still is one of the best at that. You want to take us out, buddy?
There's an environment that encourages the consumption of bad food. So it's like you can't be a junkie unless there's a dealer. So yeah,
He's much better with words.
We are junkies because there are dealers pushing bad food on us. But we wouldn't have had an event like this 5 years ago. We certainly wouldn't have had it 10 years ago. There wasn't the kind of interest. We have seen really great strides in school lunches. We have seen great strides in animal welfare. We've seen some strides in other things. The Berkeley soda tax, which is also the Mexico soda tax, and soon to be the Great Britain soda tax, is a real thing. Bloomberg couldn't get that through here, but de Blasio may. There are changes happening. I think it's not about helicopter parents so much as about people seeing that this is an unjust and disease-ridden food system. One last thing that about Union of Concerned Scientists did a study about 2 years ago, which basically said an increase in the consumption of fruits and vegetables by 15% would save $11 trillion in the United States. So it's not, it's not just healthcare costs, it's healthcare, it's health. We are getting sicker. We're spending money for it. We spend way less money on food than any other industrialized country in the world. We don't have to spend a lot more on food to be eating real food. It may not happen. I go back to the first thing I said. When we start educating children and we start shielding children from the pushers of bad food, then 25 years from now we'll have a generation of healthy adults. Until then, we probably won't.
Well, we began thinking about the low-hanging fruit, and we leave tonight with a belief and a confidence that, in fact, there will still be low-hanging fruit in our agricultural production system, because on that note of optimism, I want to thank Mark and Peter and Marcia and Earthjustice for sponsoring this great event. Thanks so much to all of you for your participation and your great questions. Thanks so much.